Well, hello everybody. Thank you for all joining us today. Today we're here to talk about demand response and how it can help you. So today's session will run for about 30 minutes. We'll have about 10 minutes for questions at the end. So I think you've all probably got a chat session there. So just type your questions into that chat session at any time and we'll try to get through as many of those as we possibly can towards the end of the program. Once the session's completed, we'll also make this session available for download and playback, so you can forward on to those that couldn't actually make it, or if you need to go back over any of the details, it'll be all there for you. So to get started today, I'm going to introduce who we've got with us. So myself, I'm the founder and director of Flow Power, and here we've got David Evans, who will introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm David Evans, the Director of Projects and Engineering.
And we've also got Byron.
Hi, I'm Byron, so I work in the engineering, and demand response has been my most common point where I've been working on in the ARENA New South Wales program.
Yeah, thanks, Byron. So Flow Power, we're a licensed electricity retailer. We're very much focused on wholesale electricity in the market. Our goal, one of our goals, is to try to make or provide our customers with all the same tools that a typical retailer would use to purchase your energy. So that means access to things like spot price, the spot market, but also some really exciting things like large-scale renewable generation, derivatives, batteries, generation. But we probably go a little bit more than just providing those tools as well, because when it comes to using energy, it's fairly, well, does a retailer have a need to, I guess, undertake demand response? And you guys as the energy users definitely do. And one of our core goals is to make that easy for you. And that's what we're going to try and go through today in a little bit more detail. So as Flow Power, we're very much here to partner with you in your energy usages and try to make things like demand response just part of your everyday business as much as possible. So today we're going to look at, just briefly talk about the history of demand response and where it's at today. We're going to look at how it works and what's involved for you to make a decision to get involved. And we'll also provide an example of demand response and answer some questions toward the end. So history of demand response. So just in terms of Flow Power and what we've been doing in the market, we've been doing wholesale electricity for 9 years, but for much longer than that, in fact, because our sister company, Utilicor, which is where we sort of grew from, has been doing this for like 20 years. So over that time, we've seen lots of changes in the market in terms of how demand response works and the take-up of customers in the market for demand response. Because we partner with our customers, we've had very good retention rates and fundamentally we've been able to save customers a lot of money in terms of their energy costs. And interestingly, when we incorporate some of our new technologies where we coordinate your power usage with things like large-scale renewables and demand response, the savings can become very, very cost-effective and very, very powerful. So we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. So the market has changed in terms of what we've got in today's market. So we've come from a market that has very much relied on centralized sources of power, large coal-powered power stations, and it was very much designed to generate power and consume it, and you had very few options for customers to receive benefits of demand response. And truthfully, in the past, there wasn't really a need because the cost of energy was cheap. I always do recall in the early years of Utilicor signing contracts that were 1.8 cents for peak energy for customers. So when your energy is that cheap, who cares really? It's that cheap. It's not worth doing anything at all. So that sort of has probably put us into a position where our market is, you will argue that it's designed wrong. The electricity is enormously a dynamic machine where everything that you do on the power side in terms of how you use your power has a direct and immediate impact on the generation side. And we're probably not fully aware of that because we've just had so much freedom in how we use our power. But literally, you turn on a heater and something somewhere else has to generate that power, and it's instantaneous. So it's actually our current market hasn't been logically designed because of that dynamic nature. The concept of just using power whenever you want is very, very difficult, or not really logical. So probably the other thing, before I move on too much further, over the coming years, we're going to have something like 6,000 of new renewable generation coming to the market. Now that's variable generation, very, very different to the brown coal baseload generation. So we've now moved ourselves into a position where change is not just desirable, it's required. We're actually going to need the change. So where we're heading in terms of the marketplace, in terms of what we've got today, is we do have access to a lot more energy data. We have access to large-scale renewables. We're bringing in demand response and the concept of two-way distribution, so that embedded generation is now pretty standard, where it's quite common for customers now to export into the grid, which is something that the market in the past definitely didn't have. So as we move forward, we need to look at why we need demand response. So do we need demand response? It would be nice if we could just continue to use power forever and never have to worry about when we use power. But the reality is that we've got almost no choice. That things have to change. You can't bring in 6,000 megawatts of variable sources of energy and continue as business as usual. In the past, we used to be able to turn our generation up and down based on the needs of what was happening in the market. In the future, our generation will go up and down as the wind blows and the sun shines. And that potentially would mean that if we don't reduce power during those times, or we don't come up with batteries or peaking plants to fill that gap, the lights will literally go out. So demand response is the first, it's the logical and one of the first steps that we need to undertake in this market. And it will reduce the likelihood of blackouts and build greater reliability in the grid. If you wanted to try and build a new baseload generator, you definitely can, and that's definitely, a lot of discussion in the market about that as being one of the viable options going forward. But one of the things you do have to consider is it will take time to build a new baseload generation. It's not a small thing. It'll take 3 to 5 years to happen. And generally speaking, you're going to find that it's going to be expensive. So the predictions of what that baseload generation will cost is actually quite high. So it's one thing to also just keep in mind that renewables are actually very cheap, and we'll talk a bit about that as we move forward. But they are actually a very cheap source of energy, and that source of energy is getting cheaper. But the biggest problem you've got right now in the market is consumers aren't seeing that really cheap energy, and that is one of the reasons why we exist. One of our goals is to give you the ability to access that really cheap energy, but that really cheap energy is variable, so you need other tools to be able to deal with that variation, and that's where demand response is a key component of that. And the fourth one I'll just make is price efficiency, and that's one of our very clear goals in terms of as we deal with our customers. We talk about price efficiency, and what does that mean? Well, fundamentally it means do you use more power when the price is cheap and less power when the price is expensive? So if you can achieve that, we would say you're becoming price efficient. And what we're starting to do is provide you with a measure of how price efficient you are. And we encourage our customers to try to become more price efficient. So demand response is part of that, and it's a key part of becoming more price efficient. And it's not just in terms of responding to demand response programs like the RERT and AMO's response, but it's just in terms of price. So as the spot price comes out, if you literally try to use just a little bit less power when it's expensive and a little bit more power when it's cheap, you're taking a good step to becoming more price efficient. And a lot of our tools are very much focused on achieving those sorts of goals. So I'm just going to skip ahead to here. So to become price efficient requires technology, and that's probably one of the big things that has changed in the market. So if I go back 5 or 10 years, technology didn't exist to the same extent as it exists today. So it's actually a key enabler, and one of the key things that has changed that makes demand response quite possible. Things like Internet of Things, real-time data, smart meters, and the ability to measure the outcome are true changes in the market that we didn't have many, many years ago. So technology is one of the key things that has changed in the marketplace without a doubt. I'm just going to go back. Just to wrap up the history of things, so just to give you a bit of feedback on terms of the what is happening in the market. So demand response this year has become far more topical, but it is actually happening in the market. We've been doing it for many years in terms of response, in terms of what we might call natural demand response, in responding to high market pricing. But AMO's RERT program has come into play this year, and they've found 1,100 megawatts of capacity. Now that's actually hugely significant, because the cost of building a generator that size would be in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So we've managed to gain that, and we gained it very quickly. Actually, you wouldn't believe how quickly AMO brought that program online. We've already been activated with a LOR2 event. Now that means basically a situation where we're one step away from AMO cutting power in the grid. So when we get to LOR2, AMO call upon us to avoid us going to LOR3, and I understand it was very successful. And we've had 8 retailers sign on. So it is actually happening in the market, and 1,000 megawatts is a testament to what it can provide in the marketplace today. So that's a bit of a brief summary of the history of where we're at. So I'm actually going to hand over to David Evans now, who's going to take you through some more practical examples of how it works and what's involved. So David.
Thanks, Matthew. So I'm going to briefly touch on the basics or some of the demand response programs out there. So there are essentially 2 categories of demand response, what we call formal programs, and those are ones that are run by network service providers, AMO, the market operator, and they include things like the RERT program that Matthew mentioned, the ARENA demand response program, and they're all designed to support the market or the grid in terms of providing additional or freeing up some capacity in times of constraint. So these are public programs that are generally rolled out to consumers, often through retailers or other aggregators in the market. The other type of demand response, which Matthew also spoke about, is what we call market price, or that price efficiency topic that was touched on. And really what this is about is avoiding high prices in the market when they occur, but also managing your consumption to take advantage of things like low-cost renewable generation when it's available. And I'm going to give you some examples of how that actually looks. So if we take an example of the RERT program, this is just a basic sort of walkthrough of how that program actually occurs. So what happens is it all starts with a forecast where AMO are predicting a shortfall in the market. So AMO forecast consumption and generation on a obviously daily basis, look ahead of what they expect the market to be, obviously daily basis, look ahead of what they expect the market to do, and where they see a shortfall in the available capacity in the market, they will alert the participants of, say, the RERT program that there may be a requirement for them to participate. So we would receive Flow Power would receive a message to say, you may be required, and we would then look to our customers or seek confirmation that our customers can provide that demand response. So we have a messaging system, and Byron will touch on a real example of how that all looks and works. But essentially, we would notify our customers. We would then seek their confirmation that they can enroll or provide the demand response. And then in the event that AMO actually do require the demand response, the event's called. And so when the event is called, customers obviously have a time at which they will ramp down or reduce their load to the agreed capacity, whether that's 50, 100% or 25% of your load. It depends what specific capacity or demand response the customer has enrolled to provide. So that route event typically can go from anywhere from 1 to 4 hours. And during that period, the reduction in demand is essentially measured through a baseline methodology, and AMO then report on that back to the provider, in this case Flow Power, and we would then obviously receive a payment from AMO which goes through to the customers for providing that response. Once the event's ended, obviously customers then return to normal operations. A bit of a quick overview there. So the other type of demand response, which is essentially something Flow Power has been working in with our customers for a very long time, is in response to the actual wholesale market price. So for those who are not aware, the wholesale price is not static. It's not a fixed peak and off-peak rate that most of you would be familiar with. It's dynamic and it changes on a 30-minute basis throughout the day. And of course, it's probably no surprise that there are times in the market when the price is low and there are times when the price is high, and they are often driven by supply and demand, i.e. high periods of demand, fewer sources of generation results in higher pricing in the market. It's a pretty standard equation. So in terms of a customer, by accessing that particular market, you have an enormous opportunity there to obviously take advantage of the periods where prices are low, but also to avoid or reduce consumption when prices are high. And that can be done through a number of different mechanisms, things like on-site generation, demand response through reducing loads, and obviously following profiles of renewable generation of wind and solar. In addition to that, there's also opportunities for the customer to receive payments through formal market programs like the AMO's RERT program, where they're actually paid for providing that demand response. And it's probably no great surprise to most of you that there's a very high correlation of high prices when those programs are likely to be called, and we did see an example of that on the 19th. So there can be obviously a duplicit sort of benefit there for customers by enrolling in these programs who are also managing their exposure to the wholesale market. They can often receive a double benefit there. This is an example of January 19 this year for BICN SA. Make that work. So in this particular example, you can see the green line is the wholesale price and the orange is our customer's load. So we had an event that was called a high price event in the market, which is relating to the spot price. So there's an agreed threshold that our customers will reduce load, where it becomes more economical to reduce load or potentially run on generation, localized generation, rather than purchase from the market. At the same time, as it happened, the RERT event from AMO was also called, which meant that the customer also received additional payment for that same period. It was about more than a 50% reduction in load during that event. So it's a very good example of where demand response works really well. And these customers would have had some advance notice of the event, and right up until the actual start of the event, they would have had some pre-warning, which they could make preparations or provide take some mitigation action. So one of the things that often comes up with demand response is, for a customer, is how can I actually do this? Or can I actually do it is probably a better way of phrasing it. So we often see, cover some of the basic questions that we often get asked by customers or that are raised when we actually talk about, reducing load or curtailing load. And obviously one of the top is, is it worth my business participating? Well, really, it comes down to a cost-benefit analysis. So what's the impact of reducing load on your business versus the payment or the reward? And that could either be an avoided cost through essentially avoiding a high price in the market, or a payment through the AMO's RERT scheme. It's probably also worth mentioning, which I didn't cover, if we talk about the wholesale price again, when we talk about these high prices that occur relatively frequently in the market, it's worth remembering that the fixed rate contracts that most people are familiar with have built into those prices a certain amount of risk or volatility. So essentially what it means is you pay for that whether it occurs or not. So it's often much more efficient to look at how you can manage that, which is essentially the model that we engage our customers with. The second is I can't respond quick enough. So to get around that, we look at automating the site, and that can be done through, as Matthew said, technology. So technology enables customers to respond very quickly. It's also important to remember that the customer always has the right to opt out in or out of any response program. So if they need to run, they can do so. In terms of how customers are made aware of the event, we've developed a rather sort of complex, I guess, and robust messaging notification system that ensures that messages are received by customers, and we can ensure that we get acknowledgement of those customers receiving that message, so we can be certain that they're aware of what's going on, and it's obviously an important part of the whole program. So just to continue, again, I can't interrupt my operations is a very common response. Well, we would say even subtle changes can make a fairly large difference. So it comes down to looking at what you can and can't do and what optionality you have. And if it means making gradual changes over time, well, that can have substantial impact. Again, most people use power on hot days. Well, that in fact creates the market problem. And again, one of the things that we often talk about with the RERT program is that by enrolling in that program, you have the option to be paid for curtailment rather than being forced off, involuntary, and not be paid. So in many ways, it's a great option to get to be paid for curtailing and supporting the market rather than involuntary. Again, education through businesses is a really key one. So making sure that all the key stakeholders in the business, and that includes the operational team that are responsible for delivering the product or service or the irrigation, are aware of what we're trying to achieve. And we do a lot of work with the on-site people to make sure they understand what they're actually trying to achieve and why they're doing it, and obviously work with them through sort of an educational campaign. So very quickly, the results of some basic stats on some wholesale events. We had an agricultural customer that saved around 23,000 in Jan by just shutting down for 3 afternoons or reducing load for 3 afternoons. A small building material customer received that $1,500 credit through exporting on solar during a high price event, which means he reduced his load and allowed the solar to further increase its export. And a water authority received around $5,000 for exporting from their generator during an event. So these are all sort of small examples of how demand response and practice can actually work.
It's probably true to say, David, isn't it, that the rewards for this are not trivial. They're actually pretty chunky and decent, aren't they?
They certainly can be, yes. Yeah, there's a very high level of motivation when the benefits are understood by customers to participate in these programs, and certainly with the formal programs that they're very attractive.
Yeah, so we're not just talking about a couple of percent on the account. Often through a very small amount of effort, you can get a big windfall. So it's probably like the incentives are significant at times.
Yes, most definitely. So just to summarise, in terms of what the benefits of demand response are, obviously for a customer, it's about saving money, and that can be through reducing your consumption during high spot prices, but also aligning your consumption to low spot prices, or aligning it to renewable generation if in fact you're connected to it. Obviously earning money through formal demand response programs, and we expect to see more and more of these entering the market. The government is keen to foster a demand response market in Australia, as we see around the world. It's easy to pair with renewables when you have this demand response program in place, or at least the ability to respond. That means you get the most out of the generation. And obviously you have the opportunity to further reduce network charges through other demand response engagement. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand it over to Byron now to take you through an actual example.
Okay, thank you, David. So I'm very excited about this section because we're actually going to go into more detail and give examples of the real event that happened on the 19th. As David mentioned, there's two types of demand response. So demand response itself is a very broad term. So whenever you respond to the market, that's essentially a demand response. We're going to be focusing on the formal programs that are actually formally funded by an entity such as AEMO, ARENA, or the New South Wales government. So we have three different programs. We had a program in New South Wales, which is called the ARENA Demand Response Program. Now, this program is being funded by the Australia Renewable Agency, or ARENA. It's also being funded by the New South Wales government and is operational conducted by AEMO. In Victoria and South Australia, we had a program which is solely funded by AEMO, and this is what we call the RED. So RED in itself is the name that AEMO gives to all the demand response programs, but the funding structure is slightly different. Now, there are a few other subtle differences, such as the length of the program. So we have in New South Wales, the program is running for 3 years, while in Victoria and South Australia, the program is only running during the summer. Now, the other subtle differences is to do with the response time of the different products. So we had some products which have a 60-minute response time, while others have a 10-minute response time. Apart from these subtle differences, operationally, these programs work exactly the same. If we use the example of the 19th of January, now this was a RED event because it was sponsored by AEMO. So before I go into more detail, we're going to go through why this event happened. So usually this RED event happens for a combination of different factors. Now, the main factor is heat. So on the 19th of January, we were at the peak of summer, and we can see that on Friday we reached 41 degrees, and this was at the back of 2 very hot days. Now, if we add to this the time of the activation of the event, which was 3 o'clock, we can see that it's late in the afternoon when most people are getting home from school and everybody's turning on their air conditioning. Now, if we add these to industries is still wrapping up their operations, then we're going to have a peak in demand. Now, oftentimes, because these events happen in the late afternoon, then we also get a reduction from solar generation, as well as sometimes it happens that the wind generation also dies down at this time. So it's probably worth noting that these events don't really happen overnight. I mean, they can happen if there is a major generator that it's taken offline, but usually these events can be forecast. So one of the very first things that AEMO does is they try and forecast this event in advance. And on the 19th of January, it was certainly the case that they were able to forecast these 2 or 3 days in advance. So as soon as we knew that there was an imminent event likely to happen, we sent messages to our customers to notify them of the possibility of this event. Now, this allowed a lot of customers to get prepared in advance. So we have irrigators who, for instance, can change their irrigation schedules so that they can run more. They can run more during the day, and then they can run more irrigation during the night, and then use less during the day. Sometimes, if we have cold storage, they can also work their equipment a little bit harder leading up to the event, so they can very safely reduce load for a couple of hours. Another way the customers prepare is through the generators. So a lot of them is getting the generators ready, fuel them up, and test them ahead of time so they can reliably transfer the loads into the generators. So having said that, on the day of the event, now when we knew the event was most likely to happen, we sent a second forecast message. And this was to notify the customers that the event was most likely to happen and the time the event was likely to happen again. At this point, we'll need to wait for our email to confirm that the event is actually going ahead. Once we receive that message, we will then send a third message to customers asking them to confirm if they can participate on this event. Now, this message is very important, as without this message and the confirmation from the customer to participate in the event, nothing else would take effect. So if the customer replies in the affirmative, then what happens 10 or 15 minutes ahead of the event, the K-Watch controller sends a start signal to the site control to start the what we call the load reduction sequence or the shutdown sequence. Now, the controller needs to be integrated with the site control PLC or SCADA system. And this is done through a hardwired signal that gets, input on the PLC to have the system shut down on time. So when it comes to the question of my site can respond quickly enough, we need to consider technology that will allow us to do so very quickly. So some of the very common questions that I receive regarding the controller is, I don't really feel comfortable with any third party controlling my load remotely. Well, the answer to that is we're not going to be controlling your load remotely. All we do is we provide you a start signal. The second question that we very often receive is to do with who is actually controlling the loads. Now, we only provide the start signal, and it's up to your site PLC or SCADA system to reduce the load and do it in an appropriate manner to their equipment. So just go back to this. So this was the actual results of the event, and David went through it. As you can see, there was double advantages from the wholesale price event as well as getting participation payments from the road event. As you can see, just leading up to the event, there's an increase in demand, and this allowed the customers to be prepared. So if we bring it all together, you can earn a new revenue stream. This helps the grid avoid a blackout. So in addition to the financial benefits, this is a major one. If essentially you're getting paid to shut down rather than get shut down by email and not get paid, like David mentioned. So this also works with a wholesale purchasing solution because you're most likely going to be double dipping, and a K-Watch controller makes responding to these events very easy. So getting set up to participate is easy. You have a chat with us. We assess your loads. We assess your capacity to participate on these events. Now, the second step is we'll help you set up the K-Watch controller, and we'll also do some testing. And lastly, once you're ready, it's just a matter of waiting for an event to actually happen. So does anybody have any questions? And I will hand it back to Matthew. Thank you.
Thanks, Byron. So what we'll do is we'll just spend a little bit of time looking for questions. So please type your questions into the window now, and we'll start to go through them. So we've got a question here. How does the K-Watch controller save on energy consumption? So David, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yep. Okay. Well, essentially, it can obviously be programmed to reduce consumption during periods of higher pricing or extreme high pricing, but also to enable loads to operate during low pricing. So it can essentially align the consumption where possible through to the price in the market. Obviously, if you're talking about renewable generation, it can also align to things like wind and solar generation as well, which would sync to generation data from those generators and manage load around to the extent that you can around optimizing that generation. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. So it's probably also fair to say that the controller doesn't necessarily reduce consumption, but moves consumption, doesn't it? That's one of the sort of the key things it does.
Yeah, excellent point. So that's shifting load rather than actually reducing load.
Yeah.
Reducing consumption.
Yeah. So what is the benefit for businesses who sign onto the program but are never called upon in an event? So Byron, is that something you can answer? Or
yes, definitely. So for the ARENA program, there's two types of payments. So there's the availability payment, which is available regardless of whether there's activations events or not. These payments are usually done on the basis of a test, and the ARENA program has two tests, one during the summer and one during the winter. So provided you can prove to AEMO, ARENA, and the New South Wales government that you do have the reserves available if they need it, then they're willing to give you a payment. In addition to this, there's actual payments that come in if the load is actually reduced during an activation event.
Yeah. Okay. Just to follow up on that, we've got another question here saying, how significant are the demand response payments without giving away figures? Now, we probably can give away some figures here because we know that the market cap for, so if just in responding to price, which is a form of demand response, then I think it was $14,000 a megawatt. Is that right? David, do you
at the maximum price? Yeah.
Yeah. So demand response programs are quite significant. So if you compare that to what you're normally paying, it's it's $14 a kilowatt hour is essentially what that figure is, where you might pay an average of 10 cents normally. So it's quite significant.
Yeah, you can also compare it to financial products in the market that essentially deal to market price, and very broadly, the value of those products typically is anywhere from sort of about 80 to 120,000 in Victoria per megawatt of capacity. So that gives you an idea of what a value of demand response might look like for your particular site.
Is that for a whole year?
Yeah, roughly for a 12-month period.
Yeah. Okay. So and if you just put that in comparison to just putting in a generator, it almost suddenly if you had a desire for a backup generator and you do this, suddenly you've got almost like a return on investment for a backup generator. That's tangible that you normally don't get.
Exactly.
So is demand response suitable for all industry types, or is it only relevant to specific industries such as agriculture and manufacturing? David, do you want to have a go at that?
Yeah, certainly. So obviously there are some industries that are better suited to doing large amounts of demand response, and examples of that might be irrigators that have some capacity to shift load around. But what we do find is that almost every customer will have some capacity to do demand response. It might be more subtle for some industries than others. It might be as simple as changing the times at which heating loads or air conditioning loads come in and out. And we are talking often only very short periods and very infrequent times of the year. So the impact is often quite minimal when you look at it in context of an overall year. So the broad answer is that most customers are able to do something. It's about understanding what capacity and what the benefits are available to them for their participation in it.
I guess just to add to that question, Matthew, sorry for interrupting. So we also have a few different industries participating. We have manufacturers, we have irrigators, we also have cold storage, local councils. So essentially anybody who can provide some sort of load that they won't need and it's not very critical for the system.
Yeah, and it's really important to understand it's not about your whole load, is it? It's about what you can provide. So it might be just half the air conditioning systems at a large building, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah. So another question is, can you explain further about demand response helping with wholesale purchasing option? So David, do you want to have a stab at that one?
Sure. So there's a couple of ways in which you can look at how you benefit, how demand response will benefit you from the wholesale market. Perhaps the easiest way to look at it is if you take a traditional retail price, fixed peak and off-peak rates, which no doubt most of you are familiar with, But what sits actually underneath that is the wholesale energy price. And so it is effectively a retailer taking a hedge against that price. So they in that peak and off-peak price that most of you pay is a amount of risk component, or essentially that pricing in an amount of volatility. So one very simple way is to use demand response to actually physically manage the high prices and essentially enjoy or benefit from the average lower prices from the spot. And that is relatively easy to extrapolate what the value is out of that by looking at a product called the cap from the market. But essentially, it's a form of physically managing your exposure to a wholesale market rather than taking a fixed price which has built into it and a component of risk. So when you implement demand response, we typically see savings anywhere from 10 to 30% depending on the prevailing market and the specific circumstances. And those are obviously benefits that get enjoyed by the customer through these types of purchasing strategies.
Yeah, and that's probably where that discussion about price efficiency comes into it as well, isn't it? You know, one of your goals on wholesale purchasing is just generally to become more price efficient.
Yeah, it's exactly about, if you can align yourself to the true cost of generation, if you like, or the wholesale represents essentially the lowest cost of generation entering the market, then essentially you should, in theory, obtain the most efficient price you can. And that can be also through connecting to renewable generation, as we mentioned.
Okay, there's a few more questions coming through. Okay, so can you explain more about how demand response helps renewables? So I can have a go at that one. Obviously, as we said, 6,000 megawatts of new renewables coming into the market, and you can't turn a renewable on and off as required. So obviously, if you can implement demand response in alignment with that, hopefully some customers start to generally use less power when the wind's not blowing and more power when the wind is blowing. And by doing that, your ability to integrate renewables becomes, far better.
So, also makes the market cheaper for everyone, really.
Yeah, it does. And those ones that do this first get the biggest bang for their buck, don't they?
Yep.
So, how long will formal demand response programs be running? Byron, can you give us an estimate on that one?
Yes, so we have the ARENA program, which is running for 3 years and finishing up in the end of 2020. We had the the RED program in Victoria and South Australia, which is only running for 3 months and is coming to an end in the next couple of weeks. And it's likely that they'll probably resume every summer from the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I'd probably add to that, obviously demand response, as we've said, it's quite broad in terms of how it's applied. So it can be applied just to just wholesale purchasing as well. So from that point of view, they'll run forever for as long as the market is. And I'd say demand response will just become a normal part of the market as we go forward. So it's probably going to be here forever.
I think it's also fair to say that the government and the market operators are certainly very invested in developing a demand response market in Australia, because they can see, in terms of other options like building more power generation, which are incredibly costly and will ultimately cost the market a lot more money. Demand response is ultimately a lot more efficient. It can be implemented very quickly, and it's a lot cheaper. So for those reasons, the government is obviously sponsoring and keen to see that market continue to grow in this country. So we should expect to see more of these programs and more market opportunities being rolled out.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're getting towards the end. I think there's one more question here I'll bring forward. There's a few more coming through, but we can't probably go on for too much longer. So I guess this question, how do I get this right. So they're asking, how hard is it to join up? I guess is the question. How hard is it to join up? So,
You want to go there? Sure, I can have a go at that.
Well, David or Byron, whoever's got, yeah.
The programs are made to be relatively easy to join and enroll in. Obviously, it's about reaching an agreement with us on some terms under which the demand response is provided. But suffice to say, they are generally provide sufficient incentive without any significant penalty or little or no penalty to the customer. So it's about encouraging. They're designed to encourage the customer to participate and get involved, and rather than have any significant threat or penalty as a result of not participating. So often referred to as a all carrot and no stick kind of program, which is great. This obviously means that we can help customers develop this market.
Yeah, and probably the other thing, it's very much in line with what you said, the barrier is actually very small, isn't it? So you don't need to come on with a plan to shed 90% of your load. You could come
Not
on,
at all.
with a view just to let's start with just 5 or 10% and build on it as you get better systems.
Yeah, a lot of it's about customers taking a small step to see what they can do, getting involved, and then building their kind of capacity from there.
Yep. Another brief question here. I'm not sure. Byron might be able to answer this one.
Sure.
When will next summer round of offers go out? So it's probably for the REP program, I suppose.
Okay, so for the REP program, they'll probably be starting late November, most likely just ahead of the summer period. The arena, well, we're doing 2 tests every 6 months. So the next test will probably be in June, and then there will be another one in early November.
Yeah. And just to clarify, we've got, I think this question was partially answered before, the industries that can participate. Obviously, we've got agricultural and manufacturing, but it really does apply to literally any industry where you're using power. It's just really a matter of how much you can participate. So agricultures are fantastic because often if it's a pumping type load, they can shut off 100% of it. But for a building services load, that'll be a little bit different because you can't just shut down everything and turn the lights off if there's people in the building. So it's a case of degrees that they can participate, but any industry can come to us and we can explore what they can and can't do.
Yep.
So I think what we'll do is we've still got a few more questions here, but I think it's probably time to wrap it up. So I think we'll call today finished. But I appreciate everyone coming online and taking the time to listen to what we've got to say about demand response. Please don't hesitate to make contact with us to talk about what we can do. We are here to help with this. It is what we do. So please give us a call at any time. And thank you, David and Byron, for your input today and providing your expertise on this topic. And we all look forward to talking to you all soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.